Hi everyone, it's Tammy. Just got in from walking the dog. Gorgeous outside, little cool, but very nice. Thought I would come in and warm myself up a tea. So I just took some fresh ginger, fresh turmeric, and lemon and steeped that in some hot water and just a little smidgen of honey. So just gonna sip on that. So yummy. Actually, we have a local farmer here who raises bees, so I'm using her local honey in my tea. Also, she grows garlic, so I'm going to be actually using some of her garlic in one of the two recipes that I'm going to be doing today. So today is actually part two of my roasted beets video. So today I'm going to take those roasted beets that I cooked in video one, and once they were cooled down enough for me to handle them, I just simply took a paring knife, went to the opposite end of where I had cut off the leaf end. Went to the opposite end, it kind of bubbles up, and I just peeled the skin off really easily. Now I could have did those beets a little quicker if I had wrapped those beets in foil paper instead of taking like the hour and 15 minutes that it took my beets to cook. If you wrap them in foil, it probably brings the cooking time down to maybe 35-45 minutes. But the one thing about my kitchen is I try to generate as little waste as possible. So I don't use a lot of saran wrap or foil paper. I use those things very rarely. I try to use things that are reusable. So for instance, I use a lot of these little silicone lids to cover things instead of using, say, saran wrap. Like I reuse milk bags instead of buying Ziploc bags. Like I don't need to buy any of that extra stuff because the last thing I want to do is put extra plastic or garbage into the environment. So try my best to kind of reduce that. But anyways, so we're going to get to two recipes today using those roasted beets. I did actually peel a couple and put them in the freezer because I am going to be making a chocolate beet cake for someone in the near future, but not in the next couple of days. So put those in the freezer, they'll be fine, and I'll just take them out the day before and thaw them overnight in the fridge. So a couple of those aren't included. I'm going to make smaller versions of those recipes. I also used some of those beets to kind of make recipes already so I could taste them and you could see them, because the soup, I don't want you to watch me cook a soup. So I'm going to go through these recipes pretty quickly because once you actually roast the beets, the recipes take no time at all. So these are great for nights when you are like, you don't feel like cooking and you want something on the table quick. So the first recipe is going to be a beet salad. A friend of mine shared this salad recipe with me very recently, and I can't get enough of it. I love it, and it's so simple. So what I did with some of those beets, this is about 3 beets in here. I just diced them up after I peeled them. And what I'm going to do with this recipe, this morning I got up and I was going to add a little bit of onion to this. It's like a beet salad. And I didn't have any red or a nice sweet Vidalia onion. All I had were cooking onions. So I decided to take a half of a small onion, just sauteed it off just really quickly, just to soften it and get a little bit of color on it. Just helps bring those sugars out of the oven and they caramelize nicely, and it just gives a nice flavor. So I'm just going to add that half of sauteed onion into my beautiful bowl of diced beets. And I'm just gonna, so that's gonna really add some flavor. The beets themselves, of course, again, because they're roasted, have a lot of flavor in them. Now, I'm gonna garnish this with something after. Something that really pairs wonderfully with beets is dill. Sorry about that, just disappeared for a minute. So I did actually chop up some nice fresh dill. I have a really good chef's knife, so I chopped that up really good. So I have a lot of it. I'm going to add it to my soup as well as to this beet salad. Another way to process it, though, is you can just take a pair of clean scissors, kitchen scissors, and just snip your herbs if you don't have a really good knife. However, a really good knife is a good idea in the kitchen. So I'm just going to add a really nice pinch, generous pinch, and maybe even a touch more because I love dill. And actually, beets pair with quite a few things. Dill is one spice, or herb I should say, that really goes well with it. Orange goes good, lemon goes good with beets, fennel, chives, onions, potatoes, sour cream. Beets are a pretty versatile vegetable, but dill is a classic one that pairs up. I had Ukrainian, Polish grandparents on one side growing up, so we ate a lot of beets growing up and lots of dill with them. So I've got the onion, I've got the dill, and I've got the beets so far. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put together a small vinaigrette because I only have a small amount of beets. And we did do a vinaigrette in a previous video. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a really good extra virgin olive oil. I'm going to use 1 tablespoon. Measure that out. And I'm going to add it to my good old mason jar. I'm also going to add 1 tablespoon because, again, I like that 1-to-1 when it comes to that little bit more acidic vinaigrette. But again, you're going to have to make your vinaigrette to your liking. So I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. And when my friend told me about this recipe, she says you have to use apple cider vinegar. But just so you're aware, beets pair really well with just plain white vinegar, white wine vinegar, even balsamic vinegar is a good match with beets. So if you're looking at other vinegars, kind of whatever you have on hand, though even red wine vinegar I'm sure would be fine. I'm also going to get a little bit of sweet. So far I've got my oil, I've got a little bit of acid. I'm going to get some sweet, and I'm going to add just a half a teaspoon because beets actually have a half a teaspoon, pardon me, of honey, because beets actually have quite a bit of sweetness, natural sweetness to them. So there isn't a lot of need to add a ton of sugar, especially to this vinaigrette, because I'm going to get some from my beets. I'm going to keep that teaspoon because I'm going to need it for the soup, that half teaspoon. And then I'm going to add some heat because, again, we're trying to balance out acid, sweet, heat, and a little bit of salt, right? Those are your 4 main flavors, and you're always trying to balance those out, especially when you're making vinaigrettes and different dishes. So little pinch of salt because this is a very small recipe, and always some fresh ground black pepper into there to season that up. And then I'm going to put on my lid and do my favorite thing. I'm going to shake the vinaigrette. I should put some music on actually when I do this because really, come on, it's the best way to shake a vinaigrette. Okay, so we're going to shake that up. Now you can add other spices again, like I said, a lot of different things will pair with your beets. But I got some nice fresh ingredients in there, so we got lots of flavor, and this is just going to bump that flavor right up. So I'm going to add, now again, I'm going to probably let these beets marinate in the fridge for at least an hour so that those flavors can all come together. I mean, you can also add, if you wanted to this, I know that sometimes my friend adds a bit of garlic to hers, which you could add a bit of garlic. So yeah, whatever you want. I'm just going to get that in there, and I'm just going to mix that up. Oh, it's looking beautiful. The one thing about beets, that red color, it's so beautiful. It's like crimson, dark red. And it's such a beautiful color on your plate when you're serving it with other items, or if you're just eating it on its own. So just like this with the vinaigrette and a little bit of dill and that little bit of onion, you've got a nice side vegetable if you wanted. But sometimes I like to eat this more as almost like the main dish, right? Maybe I might have a nice crusty roll with it. So if I'm going to bump up maybe the protein in this, because there's not really a lot of protein in this dish right now, what I like to add, and which just makes this dish, is I like to add a little bit of feta cheese. So I'll take a little bit of feta, crumble that in. Now, I'm going to do this right now because I am going to eat some of this because I haven't had lunch yet. So I'm going to crumble in some feta. And the other protein I'm going to put in this is some fresh walnuts. Because walnuts will also, there's a nice plant-based protein that will also add some great flavor and also some great protein and just make this a little more substantial. So it's almost like a main dish salad now. Now, if I was going to serve this, say, at another meal or another time, I would leave out the cheese and the walnuts and only add that just before. And actually, if I was serving it at a dinner party or to other guests or even my family, I would probably leave the cheese and the nuts in separate little dishes and let people add their own. Only because, like, you never know when someone has maybe a nut allergy. I mean, obviously in your family you'd know that, but if you're serving it out to other people. Also, you don't want these things to be sitting in the dish all day marinating with your salad because it's going to turn everything red. So it's not as appealing, right? You get such a beautiful contrast when you just leave it on top and add it just last minute, okay? So just before we move on to the second recipe, because as you can see, some steam in the background, I've got my stock already going because my second recipe, I want to get right into it. But before we do that, just got to taste this before we move on. So yummy. Oops, right off today. This tastes good. This marinade hasn't even like had time to like sit and it's already tasting good. So an hour, 2 hours from now, oh, I love feta and I love walnuts. Amazing. Anyways, this salad, you're gonna love it. It's an amazing salad, comes together really quick and very nutritious, very good for the environment because it's full of veggies and it's got some plant-based protein in it. So very good. Anyways, we're going to move on to the second recipe right away. I've got some stock, about 4 cups of stock, just simmering away in the background. What I'm going to do to that stock, and you can use vegetable stock, chicken stock, beef stock, whatever you have. It can be homemade, it can be from a bouillon cube, it can be from a Tetra Pak already made, whatever you have. What I'm going to do is take a small potato. I'm going to leave the skin on. I've scrubbed it very well, so it's all clean and ready to go. And I'm just going to shred it on my large shredder. And I'm just going to add that into my simmering broth. I like to use a little bit of potato, just a little, in my borscht or beet soup, which is the second recipe. And that's because it really kind of thickens the soup up a little bit and gives it a little more body. So, and I leave the skin on because you don't taste it and it adds some fiber. So just quickly grate this up. And I'm going to add that in. To my pot. So I'm just going to give that a little stir. Now basically with this recipe for borscht, I like to add 1 cup of stock for every large to medium sized beet that I shred up for the pot. So I've done that ahead of time as well. I shredded up basically 3.5 beets. And you can either shred beets when you make borscht or beet soup, or you can cut them into little matchstick cuts, okay? So they're very tiny matchstick cuts. I just find shredding a lot faster. So again, on the large shred of my grater, I did that last night, and I just shredded them up and put them in a bowl until I needed them today. So what I do is I'm going to let those shredded potatoes cook for maybe about 5 minutes, because shredded potato cooks very quickly and it's simmering right now in that broth, so it's going to take no time at all. And then I'm going to throw this in next and simmer that for about 5 minutes along with my potato. Just going to give it a little stir. I'm turning the heat down just so that it's simmering. There are very few things in the kitchen that need to be boiled. Pasta is something you boil, but when you're preparing veggies for soups, stews, sauces, whatever, you're not boiling those things. Typically you're simmering. You might bring something up to a boil just so that the heat is there and it starts to bubble, but you definitely don't want to boil the heck out of your vegetables, right? But it's okay to boil pasta for sure. So that's just simmering right now. I'm going to let that go just for another minute or so. Just want to show you something. So last night when I prepared my dill, I took the bunch of dill, and again, I grow a container of dill in my garden every summer because I love this herb. Anyways, so what I do to store it is I usually put it in a wide mouth mason jar with some water, and I have washed this really well first of all, and in a colander, and just shaken it around really vigorously while the water is running over it, and I clean it really well so there's no sand and dirt in it. And then I put it in the mason jar with the water, so it's almost like a bouquet of dill. And then I just take one of these sort of produce bags, these light produce bags, and then I just kind of put a little chapeau, a little hat on top of it. And then I just store it. It's nice and loose. I don't make it like airtight or anything. And then I just store that in the fridge, and it lasts for a couple of weeks usually. So it's really good. I might have to just top up the water every so often just so it doesn't dry out. And then you've got nice fresh dill for quite a while. Anyways, put that back in the fridge. I'll be right back. So just so you know, I'm going to talk a little bit too, just before I put in my beets, which I'm going to probably do right now, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the bouillon cubes that I use. Just give me a sec. So now when the beets go in, they're only going to cook also for about 5 minutes. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to add just a half a clove of garlic, because I have just a really small portion of soup that I'm cooking off. So I'm just going to put it through the garlic press, add that in, and let that also cook along with the beets and the potato. If you don't have fresh garlic, you can always use garlic granules or garlic powder. And again, just remembering that proportion, it's about a cup of stock for every large to medium-sized beet, and then you can kind of go from there depending on how many beets you've roasted. To that, I am also going to add just a teaspoon of balsamic vinegar, and put that in and let that simmer along with the beets and everything, just for some extra flavor. And then I'm not going to add any fresh dill to it until it's almost finished cooking. Typically with fresh herbs, I don't add those until the very last minute or so of the cooking process, because fresh herbs are pretty fragile and they don't need a lot of heating up to get the flavors out of them. If you overcook them, you actually destroy the flavor of them. If you're using dried herbs, I tend to add those about halfway through the cooking process. And then if I'm using ground spices, like powdered spices, I tend to add those closer to the beginning because of the cooking process, because they take a little longer to get those flavors out. And a lot of times when I'm using dried spices, a lot of those recipes, I like those recipes to sit overnight. Say like a chili that has chili powder and cumin and coriander and all those things in it, because I find those flavors really mellow out overnight. So I might have a small bowl the night I make it, but then the next day I really enjoy it because I like when those flavors really meld together. So people who don't eat leftovers, I don't understand, because that's when the food tastes the best. So I'm going to talk just really quickly, because this is going to go really quick, this recipe, about the bouillon. So I tend to buy the no salt added bouillon. Mine just happens to be an organic product. It doesn't have to be, but a no salt added one, because the one thing about cooking is that I really like to be in control of how much salt and sugar and fat goes into my recipes. And I just, knowing that the North American food supply right now is loaded with salt, I don't need anybody to put salt in for me. So I like to control that. If you think about salt intake, and we have such high rates of heart disease, too much salt can be really not great for your health. Most adults, and I think of adulthood, need about 1,500 milligrams of salt a day. If you were to use 1 teaspoon of salt over the course of a day, 1 teaspoon of salt has 2,300 milligrams a day, which is way more than the 1,500 that the average adult needs. But what they've done from a lot of research is figured out that because our food supply is so full of salt, especially if you eat a lot of processed foods, most people are getting 3,400 milligrams plus of salt or sodium a day. And that is lots of salt. And you know what? Salt is an acquired taste. So the more you eat, the more you want. If you took salt out of your diet for 2 weeks, and had a really low salt diet, and then tried to go back and eat a high salt diet like you were before, you would find it extremely salty because your taste buds get used to that high salt. So often people will taste my food and say, oh, more salt. Actually, when I went to chef school for a year, that was one of the biggest things that the chef always said to me was, Tammy, not enough salt. And I always used to look at him and say, plenty of salt for me, I can taste it. So it really is something that your taste buds get used to. Anyways, we're going to give this a mix. So it's just simmering lightly, the soup. It's got about another minute or 2 to go. When I take it off the stove or off the element again, and actually because it is only a minute to go, I can put my generous pinch of dill. Now I'm going to take this recipe when I do serve it, and I am going to probably garnish it with a little sprig of dill. But something else that goes really well, and I'm going to get that out in a sec. I've got a little dish in the microwave. I'm just going to heat it up, come back, and I'm going to taste it for you. One sec. Is I'm going to pair this with a little bit of thick yogurt. I could use sour cream, but I do have some plain thick yogurt in the fridge. Yogurt tends to have a little more calcium. Sour cream doesn't tend to be as high in calcium, but don't get me wrong, I love sour cream a lot. And I do eat it with certain things like pierogi. I prefer pierogi with sour cream than with thick yogurt, but I will eat thick yogurt that's plain because it does taste a lot like sour cream, to be quite honest. But for today, I'm just going to get that little portion of soup because I made a soup ahead of time, and I'm just going to add it and we'll just have a little taste. So this soup got to sit overnight, but beet soup does not need to sit overnight. It has a ton of flavor. I mean, sometimes the garlic might seem a bit raw in it, so the next day it will taste, everything always tastes better the next day, sorry. But anyways, it'll still taste really good because these beets are so flavorful. So just give me a sec. I'm going to run and get my sample, and then I'm going to just taste it in front of you. Sorry, I love to eat. It's all good. I know you understand. So I'm going to get myself a spoon. I'm not even going to dirty a new spoon. I'm just going to get my little teaspoon from... Now, this soup is beautiful. It's so beautifully red and crimson. I'm just going to, can I line it up so you can see it? It's so gorgeous. And this soup is so tasty. It's got a little bit of sweet. It's got that savoriness from the garlic. And it is going to be, and it's oh so good for you. So I'm just going to get myself a teaspoon to taste. And you know what? When you mix in that nice yogurt, it just gives it a bit of a creamy texture. I'm just going to hopefully not burn my tongue here. I'm just going to This reminds me of childhood. I love this. This is such an easy dish. This took 10 minutes to actually make and just a few minutes to prepare. You have to shred those beets. Doesn't take long if you shred them. If you're going to matchstick them, it might take a touch longer, but all so worth it. So the longest part was really roasting the beets, right? And again, if you do it the night before, hey, you're one step ahead of the game. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Happy cooking in the kitchen, and if you're happy in the kitchen, then you're happy in the planet will be happy with you, right? Have a good day. We'll talk real soon. Come back and see my videos. Oh, and be sure to go into the comments because I'm always putting all my recipes into the comments on YouTube. So be sure to check those out so you can see all the tips and things if you've missed them in the video. All right, bye for now.